Blake had only just returned to the city, chasing whispers. His apartment, perched high above a rotting skyline, was more of a bunker than a home now. The storm had followed him back, like something unseen had clung to his coat. Thunder rolled in from the east, muffled by the thick fog crawling through the concrete maze below. On the wall, newspaper clippings yellowed by time trembled in the breeze leaking through the cracks, each headline referencing a place that didn't exist anymore. But Blake wasn't here for nostalgia. He was hunting something he didn't believe in until it started hunting him. He stood by the window, unmoving, watching as the lightning briefly illuminated something in the distance, a silhouette. Not just a structure, but a feeling. A place that didn't show up on digital maps, but had been marked in pencil on one of his late mentor's journals. It rose above the neighborhood like a tumor, a church, or what was left of it. Blake didn't remember seeing it there before, but now it seemed to call to him every time the sky lit up. No lights, no windows, just a black spire twisting into the fog. The power flickered. For a breathless second, the room went completely dark. Then the emergency lighting snapped on with a sickly amber hue. Blake's tablet vibrated on the floor. He hadn't touched it. The screen glitched to life, displaying symbols he'd only seen carved into the walls of a ruined chapel, symbols that should have been lost in a fire 100 years ago. Each line pulsed like veins. Each curve seemed to breathe. Something was coming through. He backed away, heart hammering, and glanced toward the mirror near the entryway. But instead of his reflection, he saw something else. Faceless, pale, almost human but deeply wrong. It didn't move. It didn't blink. It simply stood where his image should have been, watching him with the kind of emptiness that makes people go mad. He blinked, and it was gone. In the cold heart of winter, 2023, Blake returned to Providence, chasing silence and inspiration. He found it in an old, almost hidden building nestled within a dead-end courtyard just off College Street, a place the city seemed to have forgotten. It stood like a ghost from another era, surrounded by cracked stone, frost-covered ivy, and the skeletal remains of forgotten garden hedges. Towering above him were glass-walled dorms and offices, but his new home remained locked in time, an untouched colonial anomaly with small-paned windows and rotting wooden steps. Blake wasn't deterred. He liked places that didn't belong. Blake claimed the top floor, where the creaking floorboards and dust-choked air gave him solitude. His study looked west, over the city. Every evening he'd sit at his desk and stare out, watching the lights come alive in the buildings below, until his eyes drifted to the dark shape on the distant horizon. Federal Rise. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a hill, a mound of rooftops, spires, and antennas tangled together. But then it started to feel sentient. Some nights, the fog clung too thickly there. The shadows shifted in ways that made Blake lean forward in his chair, certain something was moving between the silhouettes of those steeples, something watching back. He set up his studio in the attic, beneath a monitor roof that let in a pale, strained light even during the day. Up there, with nothing but creaks and shifting drafts for company, Blake began creating. Stories poured out of him, nightmares about tunnels, things buried beneath floors, watchers from the stars. His paintings were worse, jagged portraits of eyeless beings and impossible cities sprawled across red skies. Yet every canvas and every page seemed to lead him back to the same place, Federal Rise. He began sketching it over and over until it no longer looked like a hill, but a face forming from rooftops, chimneys, and fog. And maybe it had always been a face. As the sun dipped low each evening, Blake would sit silently at his desk, gazing westward. The city below seemed to melt into silhouette, its brick towers and metal spires cast in orange and bruise-colored hues. The court buildings stood proud like relics, while beyond them the high-rise skyline fractured the horizon. But his eyes were always drawn to that far-off mound, Federal Rise, its silhouette glowing dimly in the polluted twilight. Even through his field glasses, it never looked quite real. He'd scan the rooftops, watching as shadows slipped between chimneys, wondering what stories slept behind crooked gables and rotting gutters. That district, he'd learned, was mostly Italian now. But Blake felt it had older roots, something buried under the stone, something that hadn't moved in a century. One structure on Federal Rise refused to leave his thoughts. A church, massive, forgotten, and silent, sat like a black scar on the skyline. At certain hours, especially during sunset, its towering steeple would cut through the sky like a dagger. Unlike the warm glow of city churches, this one was lifeless. Its facade was blackened with soot, its stone warped with time and weather. The windows, tall, pointed, and empty, looked like open mouths frozen mid-scream. Blake guessed it was built in the early 1800s before Gothic revival had found its grace. It clung to an awkward, almost malformed design, as if raised by hands unfamiliar with beauty but too desperate to care. The more he studied it, the more unnatural it felt. The birds avoided it, always. Blake watched entire flocks circle nearby rooftops, but never land on the church's stone. It was like the air itself repelled life. He wrote about it in his diary, pages filled with unease, sketching crude outlines of the tower from memory. None of his acquaintances knew the place. It was as if the church didn't officially exist. They'd never been to Federal Rise. Some even said they couldn't recall seeing anything like it. The mystery deepened, and the silence surrounding that building began to whisper louder than any voice. Blake had the uncanny sense that the church was waiting.